Okay, we're recording now. Um, so everyone here today is new, I think. Chris Hodge. Chris, did you bring up the docs thing yesterday in the Slack group?
I did, yeah. So I'm one of the leaders of SIG OpenStack, so I should probably be at the cloud provider meetings also. And I was in the docs. I attended the docs meeting yesterday, and they were talking about how they're finding that the quality of the provider documentation varies quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and similar to the provider code inside of Kubernetes, they're wondering if it's better to um, externalize those documents and link to them and make kind of the owners of them responsible for the quality and content, and not kind of have that be a located within the Kubernetes you know community where on one hand it's harder to update because because how do you find reviewers, who's responsible for it, um, and also the members of the docs team aren't necessarily experts for the particular providers. So a bunch of ideas were batted around,
Mm-hmm.
and but it's something that they're talking about and going to be working on in the coming weeks.
Okay. I think it's an important concern, and I can tell you. I don't know if maybe you're already involved in this, but Joe Beda shared. Well, there was an issue on Kubernetes first where it talked about documenting the common use cases for different clouds and like the common parameters that can be configured. And I think Joe Beda, who's I don't know if you know him already, but he on that issue commented on a Heptio maintained article for AWS, and I think others are going to participate in that and kind of document for different cloud providers. And it's very unofficial, and even like off the top of my head, I can't tell you how to find that issue. So I mean, I can see that being really useful where we have a centralized repository for provider specific config, I guess, and that is actually maintained by the providers themselves, so it adds a lot of credibility to it.
Okay, yeah, and I know that there's ongoing work right now to externalize the cloud providers. Like there's the pull request that is live right now that kind of creates separate repositories and creates the owners for those. These stub repositories, and I know that within the OpenStack SIG, within SIG OpenStack, we're in the process right now of building out OpenStack hosted repository for the provider, and shifting development there. So I mean, from our point of view, we're going to try to centralize a lot of this development anyway. It's mainly a matter of, if you have documentation, who's responsible for it, and where should it be. Ultimately, I don't care either way. Whatever the community decides, I'm happy to fall in line with. But it was something that came up at SIG Docs. I think it was a concern that came from from within the CNCF, just about the quality and the status of the docs in relation to their providers. So, and no decisions have been made, but if it's something that I'm going to probably keep going to the SIG Docs meetings, and if anyone's interested in, and I think that they're going to try to come to these meetings too to talk about it, or at least make sure it makes it up to the mailing list. So something to be aware of, and if the working group comes to a decision about really what they want, I'm happy to get behind whatever that decision is.
Well, thank you for bringing it up. So we have someone from Google Cloud here, Walter. Walter, do you know where the docs for Google Cloud setup is for Kubernetes?
No, although I just got SIG GCP just dropped a bug in my plate. There's at least one page that apparently just has I think it was AWS and like OpenStack, I think, documentation and asked me to fill in. So either I need to fill that in or find someone who can do that. But I do have that as an open issue.
And it would be preferable for you to maintain the docs for Google Cloud, right? Rather than it being maintained by the community.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, if I hand it off to someone, it will be someone else at Google.
Okay, perfect.
If I may comment on separating the docs for cloud provider. So there is advantage, as you can all tell, for this. The disadvantage also is just keep in mind that we may want to have the same example replicated across all providers. So people know, let's say, how to do disks across this cloud or that cloud or that cloud. So what I'm trying to say here is we have to also find a way where we can templatize some of the content, at least some minimum bar for all the cloud provider to at least make sure that the user experience is consistent across the cloud.
I think that's a really good idea that if there's because having a familiar and similar process creates a better experience for everybody, regardless of the provider they're using. Because presumably you might want to use multiple providers for redundancy and resiliency. So I think that's a really good idea.
So are you proposing a common format or dividing the docs into two separate parts?
So I think the docs should be two parts. A part that's cloud specific and it's fast moving and it doesn't have to go across the entire Kubernetes community, and those can be separate anywhere, right? And then there has to be a common area where all the common examples at least is there. So that provides both the advantage we're looking for. One is cloud provider specific maintained docs and consistent user experience across all the providers. I'm sorry I wouldn't be able to describe the mechanics. You guys probably know more about the process of how the community work. I'm just raising the concern.
I think it's very valid. I mean, I like that idea. So would you see the common doc being maintained by the community?
So if I can interrupt for a sec, I just threw a link into the chat. Is this essentially what you're looking for? Obviously, it doesn't contain Azure and Google, but it seems like we have somewhat of a start towards this.
I think this is it, yes. So this can be the common user experience areas that we want to have it consistent across all the clouds. And then further examples and further documentation and can be part of each cloud to its own. By the way, we have the same issue with Azure, specifically around all the knobs that needs to be turned on and off for Azure to work better. And right now, ACS engine is used for that. It's not the best place, but it's the place that users usually go to find Azure-specific Kubernetes docs. I'm assuming that most of the cloud providers will have the same problem. So if that works, it works. If it doesn't, we need to find a different way of doing it.
I mean, I can see that working where we kind of have a link to an external website that's maintained by the cloud provider, and then they maintain what's in the link. And then the common parts are maintained by the community, and it has all the common functions.
The community is the cloud providers. Like, we are part of the community. As part of that, we maintain both ways. We maintain the cloud provider and we're part of the community. So it's same, I guess. It's just the different approval process and different documentation process, and it's templatized according to community consensus somehow.
Right, that's what I mean. The responsibility lies on the Kubernetes org versus Azure or DigitalOcean or whatever. Awesome. So The other thing that we want to talk about. So are we all agree and are we all in agreement that this is how we want to move forward? Have two parts of a doc, common versus cloud specific. I mean, I like it. Walt does not.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think, consistency is always nice.
Awesome. Okay.
I think it's a good idea too. I wasn't able to open the link because I'm on the road, but I think it would be worth having either in that doc or a similar one just to call out what the scenarios are for the consistent use case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess one of the issues is deployment methodologies are always, everyone has their own deployment methodology.
Make sure there aren't challenges for some specific.
Right. So you're breaking.
Because that part should be inclusive.
Jago, you're coming in and out. I don't know if it's just me or.
Sorry, I tried to mute, but I don't know. The audio is terrible. I'm just gonna mute, and I'll follow up.
Okay.
I am. There are clear areas where the commonality is very visible. Disks, disks is one of them. Load balancers is another. Right. Those are, we can quickly agree on those, and then the reminders, the bring up experience and provisioning experience. It's arguable that they are different for each cloud, but we can talk about that. I just don't want to weigh down this discussion with the specifics right now. I think if we agree on a concept, then we can start thinking about the details.
Yeah,
I agree. This is good. Thanks, both Chris and Khaled. So the second thing I want to talk about is, Khaled, did you want to bring up the pull request that you're making for?
Yeah, that's why I'm here. So I'm Cal. What happened is we've been trying to look at where, when you start doing large clusters, you start seeing a bunch of calls coming to the cloud provider that are not really needed. And one of the hottest spots, is actually the hottest spot right now, is routes. And then if you go to, I can paste the link just for people to know what I'm talking about. This guy, the route controller. Right now, there is a route conciliation period on the controller manager, and it's defaulted to 10 seconds. And every 10 seconds, the cloud, the route controller goes to the cloud provider and grabs all the routes that has been created. Now you can imagine with a couple of thousand nodes, that's like 2,000 calls, basically, for the cloud provider. The problem is the cloud resource management were never designed as data plane. They were designed as control plane. Eventually, they will throttle you down and bug you, and the cluster start to acting fuzzy because you get throttling errors from the cloud provider, which stops stuff like nodes coming in or out, or stops even other cloud provider functions, such as very relevant to the user, such as create load balancer, external load balancer, internal load balancer, create disks, and so on. So this is really affecting us. This is not only relevant to large clusters, it's also relevant to people who have many clusters, small clusters in the same provisioning scope. So for Azure, it's the subscription level. I'm positive that same concept exists somehow in AWS and GCP. The idea is, if one cluster consumed all the quota, the rest of the clusters are also suffering, all right? That's the problem frame, basically. That's where the problem is. I just want to establish agreement that this should not be the case. Like the controller should execute. I like the concept of cheap checks. You don't have to go all the way to the cloud itself to do a check that you already have the data for. Looking at the code, one of the things is you will notice that there is a loop. It's a non-sliding loop. I'm gonna paste the link here as well. All right. So that's non-sliding loop runs every 10 seconds. So one of the solution people will tend to provide is at least the first attack on the problem is you increase the route's reconciliation period. Now that works well if you have a static cluster, meaning you don't have nodes coming in or out from your cluster. This route controller is involved with every node coming in or every node changing IP, which doesn't happen often. But if a node, let's say if I set it to 5 minutes and I have autoscaler configured, and that's the push right now is for everybody to configure autoscaler, the nodes will come, join the cluster, and then 5 minutes after, maximum of 5 minutes after, they will get the routes. So anything configured, anything scheduled on the node will not really work in terms of routing and network, service side, sorry,
So
all IPs.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Walter at Google, I know GC also uses the route controller. I think GC and Azure, and I don't know about OpenStack, but I know GC and Azure use the route controller. Walter, have you also seen this issue with a large cluster where the cloud quota is quickly consumed?
I'm not sure if we've seen that as an issue. I'm happy to investigate this. I did look at this route controller issue yesterday, and in fact, pinged the SIG network and the Google guys working on SIG network, and I know they made some comments.
Okay.
All right. My proposal to fix this doesn't include changing any of the data structures or interfaces. Everything will remain as is. What I'm proposing is let's change the implementation into an informer style pattern, and we do cheap checks without having to go to the cloud provider and ask about routes. Give me all the routes. We already have all the routes configured. So that's basically my proposal. Again, it's very important for me to establish this because I know changing IP, changing interfaces, and changing data structure is something that nobody wants to do because it's a significant impact across everybody. This is not something that entails this. This is everything as is in the same file with the same interfaces. Just do the cheap checks locally without having to go to the cloud provider.
Right. No, I understand
What
that.
are we watching?
Right.
Excuse me?
What are we?
Go ahead, Walter.
What are we watching?
Nodes.
So my understanding is that the thing we actually care about changing changing is sort of the IP address, and node this is the mechanism by which the node object knows that the IP has changed. The API server doesn't make the cloud provider knows the IP address has changed. The API server is informed by the controller that the IP has changed. So you can't do a watch on node to discover this. I think a watch style fix could work, but I think in fact if it were going to work, what you would almost need to do is leave this section of code alone and then have the cloud provider, the cloud provider implementation, take that call and use a cache, answer the call you're talking about from the cache, and then implement the cache as a watch, assuming that there is an API that the cloud provider provides that's a watch where you could say, hey, Google, Azure, Amazon, please tell me when this IP address changes.
That will work, and that's actually in V110 of Azure Cloud Provider. Similar approach, cache the call, don't go to the cloud endpoint.
Right. I just think since the API, it has to be a watch, and the unfortunate thing is it's a watch against a cloud provider specific API, so it needs to be behind the cloud provider interface because we can't force all cloud providers to implement that watch.
I am not saying we should implement it in the cloud provider. I'm really not. The changes I'm proposing in the route controller itself, not in the cloud provider.
So are you saying that?
Go ahead.
I'm kind of confused here. I'm kind of lost here in the sense I'm not sure like what we can do in the route controller other than the cache. Where are you saying we share?
We can do the cache. We can do only the cache, by the way. That will also work. The whole point of doing right now, if we ask the cloud providers to do cache, then we're asking everybody to change a code for a limitation that really at a one layer below. It's not really, and it's gonna replicate the code. And by the way, I did that because it was too painful to live with it until we fixed it. So
one thing,
we already tried that.
I have a question for you, Khalid, before we go into any of that. So first of all, I want to get to Anoop's issue also, and we have only 7 more minutes. So I'm going to do this quick. The first thing I want to go over is, I'm still not sure. Are we looking at the cloud? So is this issue, is this unlimited, or the rate limit crossing number of requests to the cloud happening when you start the cluster with a large number of nodes? Is that the problem?
Yes, or if you have many clusters in the same subscription.
Many clusters in the same subscription.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you cap at the subscription level.
Got it.
I would imagine it can also trigger if, autoscaler needs to kick in because you suddenly got a huge ramp in traffic.
So here is the thing. Right now, the node IP is assigned by kubelet on the node, all right, as it registers itself with the API server. The pod CIDR, which is part of the route definition, this is basically the source of the IP or the collection of IPs that things will be routed to, is assigned by the IPAM controller on the controller manager. Just go for node controllers. There is an IPAM controller.
Yeah, I know. Just go ahead, please.
With kubenet. And then the route based on those two information, the node IP and the CIDR, it creates the routing, the route entry for the SDN that this cluster is running in. All right. If what really route controller from a perspective of separating everything and not creating a cross dependency, what the route controller needs to do is really, if the node has changed, if its new node, create the route. If its node has changed its CIDR, all right, it should go and change the route. If node had different IP, it should go and change the route. That's really the simple discussion. And if you notice, the keyword I repeated 3 times is if. Right now, it doesn't do that. It just goes every time and assert the entire routing table.
So is it making a call every sliding time period?
Every 15 seconds sliding.
And it queries the cloud API, you're saying, or does it query? Okay, it queries the cloud API.
Yeah. In this case, it's ARM on Azure and what the equivalent of other clouds.
Right.
That's currently is eating, I would say, a good 60-70% of the code.
Okay. So would you say?
Go ahead.
Would you say having that shared informal kind of approach where all of the controllers make one call and they all share the data that comes from that call? Is that kind of how you're looking at it?
No, I don't want to share state across controllers. Just the route controller just uses its own watch for nodes.
Okay.
On that, it just makes a decision separately. Again, complying with the existing design of separating how CIDRs are assigned to nodes, how IPs are assigned to nodes, and how routes are created based on those two things.
Okay.
That way we can change the changes really inside just that one file I keep sending. Okay. And that's it. No changes other way.
Okay.
One of the interesting things I just want to make sure that people understand that, because we've seen it. If the node, let's say any change happened on the node, all right? Let's say you.
So Anoop, I'm sorry, Khalid. I have to stop you here because I want to give Anoop the chance to go over his issue. He's got another issue too. What I want to say is, let's right after this meeting, if anyone else wants to join too, on this same call after 10:30, let's continue chatting about this. Right. Everyone's welcome, but this meeting will end at 10:30. So I want to give Anoop the chance to go over his issue first. And I also want to write it down. No, please go ahead. I know yesterday you sent an email to the working group emailing list about. Let me go
yes. So let me get that link.
Clean up the external user ID.
Right. Yes, that's correct. So so I just opened that, and basically I see that external ID is deprecated, and so I'm trying to remove that, but in the pull request, I have just removed it from 2 files. But I noticed that instance ID method basically does the exact same thing, and most of the cloud providers are using like internally calling instance ID method from the external ID method. Uh, I, so I can show some of the examples. Just a minute.
Sorry, quick question. Do we know when we deprecated external ID?
It was some around 2 years back. That's what the issue was. Yeah.
No, that's fine. We have deprecation policies, and I wanted to make sure we
Okay.
were
Yeah.
adhering.
Yeah. It's the issue. There was an issue which says the external ID is deprecated 2 years back. It's here. It's mentioned here in this issue, and this is the code. Yeah. If you see the Azure code, you will see that external ID function basically calls instance ID. And I noticed that's most of the cases with other providers as well. So my question was to what extent we want to remove this external ID.
So, I mean, I saw your pull request, and the one reason I liked it is because, yeah, we have 3 different IDs for a node, which is external ID, instance ID, and provider ID. I do like having a more uniform interface where we just use, say, provider ID, but I want to really have a discussion about it and see how others feel about it.
Yes.
So Walter, Andrew, Jago, anyone?
So I will start with, if we're going to do it, now is the time. This is the sort of thing you want to do at the very beginning of a release. That way everyone has plenty of time to fix it before, and we have plenty of time to find the problems and, if necessary, revert.
Right. And also, Josh Horowitz brought up an issue there, Anup, where external ID has an implicit contract within where if it's an error condition and if the error is of type instance not found, that means the cloud instance doesn't exist. Do we have an equivalent for that in instance ID?
So the instance ID doesn't. It basically returns nil, and external ID was checking for the message.
So is there? I mean, that has to be satisfied, right, before we move to a new API.
Yeah, but I mean, as commented on that issue, the use of the return value from external ID has been seen only in a couple of files. In those files, basically, we can just check whether the return value is nil or not.
Right, but like right now, there are external cloud providers. I don't know if Google's CCM is using it. I don't know if
So Google's
Solutions is using it.
Google is using is not directly their instance ID method, and external ID method is somehow different. But yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. Like, how does the community want to proceed on this?
Well, I mean, it sounds like we don't have a really clear understanding of what all external ID does yet, and maybe if we can get clarity on that, and next week if you can kind of talk to Walter from Google and Andrew, who's also on this call from DigitalOcean, and some others from various cloud providers, and see if we can actually take them out. So that'll be good.
Yeah, for what it's worth, on DigitalOcean, the external ID call is just calling the instance ID call. It's just there to conform to the interface.
So,
slightly off topic, but I think it's pertinent. It seems like with these sort of issues coming up, we need a better mechanism to get answers from each of the relevant CPs. Is that something we maybe should actually formalize?
That would be great, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for enough to actually be able to make progress, I think we need that formalized process. We need an owner for each one who can actually go and get an answer, and we need to be able to just yeah.
Right, absolutely, I agree. maybe Jago can help us set it up, maybe, or Walter, can you help us? Like, how do we go about contacting these people, or like, what do we set it up? How do we set it up? Like a new mailing list?
Seems like a pretty. I think we need to start with an agreement of the ability to do ownership and do the work, and then once we get that agreement, then yeah, I think the mailing list is the way to go.
Okay. All right. I'll write this down for now. I'm going to stop recording, and the meeting officially ends now.